Good evening from Pasco, Washington and the Columbia Basin College, where tonight we feature the final debate between the candidates for governor, Republican Bill Bryant and Democrat Jay Inslee. I'm C.R. Douglas with Q13 News in Seattle, serving as co-moderator of tonight's event.
And I'm Enrique Cerna of KCTS 9 Television in Seattle. Our debate tonight was organized by the Washington State Debate Coalition, a group founded this year by Seattle CityClub to increase access to nonpartisan issues.
Now, we invite both our live audience here and our viewing audience to be part of this debate by following us and commenting on Twitter. Our hashtag tonight is WAELEX, that's W-A-E-L-E-X.
And actually, we're at Nonpartisan Debates. That's what we're all about. We'd like to thank our host, Columbia Basin College, Tri-Cities, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the Tri-City Development Council, Tri-City Herald, Tri-City Regional Chamber of Commerce, and Visit Tri-Cities.
And our final thanks tonight to our debate sponsors who made it possible. Lead support from the AARP of Washington and Microsoft. Our supporting sponsors are the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Henry M. Jackson Foundation, and tonight's debate sponsor, Stokes Lawrence.
Now let's begin with our opening statements. We had a coin toss prior to the debate, and that determined that Bill Bryant will go first. Mr. Bryant, let's start with you.
Thank you, and thank you, Columbia Basin College, for hosting this debate. Tonight, I want to tell you why I want this job. I want to share with you my vision of all that we can accomplish together. With 30 to 50% of our minority students not graduating from high school, with the 4th worst traffic in America, with the 8th highest unemployment in America, with homelessness exploding onto our streets, with our mental health system ranked 50th, and with salmon runs going extinct. Is there anyone who thinks we can't do better? We can, and let's do it. And let's start with education. Through 7th grade, I attended a rural school on the Skokomish Reservation. It's because of that experience that I want to ensure every kid, regardless of where they grow up, gets an education that gives them an equal chance to succeed. I'm running for governor because of education. Let's fix our traffic mess so that commuters can get to work on time and get home to see their families at a reasonable hour. And let's work with the private sector to generate good, solid family wage jobs in communities that are still struggling with unemployment. And as someone who used to volunteer at a homeless shelter, I want us to commit and dedicate ourselves to rebuilding our mental health system so we can get people out of tents and onto their feet. And I want to restore habitat so that salmon come back thick every fall for generations to come. Fulfilling that vision is going to take an activist, engaged, forward-thinking governor, someone who's willing to walk into difficult issues and who's adept at building coalitions. That's the kind of governor I'm going to be. I'm asking for your vote. And tonight, I hope I earn it.
Governor Inslee.
Thanks for all involved in this. Trudy and I are just delighted to be here tonight. Central Washington is where we raised our 3 boys in the orchards of the Yakima Valley. I used to have the honor of representing the Tri-Cities. And I think this is a perfect place for this discussion about how and why we are a confident and an optimistic state, and why we need a confident and an optimistic governor. And it's because if you look at the Tri-Cities and you look at this state, you'll realize 3 things. We're making progress on jobs, we're making progress on education, we're making progress on transportation. Start with jobs, where Lamb Weston and Cadwell Labs and AutoZone are growing jobs here. Look at the economic gardening plan we're going to take statewide. We have created 250,000 new jobs since I've been governor. 20,000 new jobs have been created in the last month. We ought to be proud about that achievement. #1 economy in the entire country. Look at education. What's happening here in Tri-Cities? Pasco Bulldogs have increased their graduation rate by 25% in the last several years. We're moving forward. Delta High School is a model for the nation in STEM education. And what is happening here is happening statewide. We have had robust increases in early child education. every single child is going to have access to kindergarten. We're the only state in the country that has reduced tuition for every student in our public schools. We're making big progress. Look at transportation. We're here, what we're doing in Tri-Cities. We now are going to rebuild the Red Mountain Interchange. We're going to fix Highway 12. And that's happening all over the state because of a bill that I helped lead and make sure it got passed. We're fixing 405. We're finishing 167 in Pierce County. We're finishing the North-South Freeway in Spokane. All over the state of Washington, we are engaged in the most massive infrastructure building program in the history of the state of Washington. So I'm looking for this tonight for this discussion. I'm a confident and optimistic governor, and I believe we ought to keep the ball rolling. Thank you.
Before we begin with our formal questioning, we all want you to know that there is a way that you can participate in shaping our debate with the help of our Microsoft Pulse poll. If you go to wadebates.org, that's wadebates.org, you can decide the subject matter we will focus on later this hour. You'll be able to pick from 4 topics: healthcare, homelessness, small business, and women's issues. In a few minutes, we will check back on those results and determine some of the questions for later in our debate.
All right, let's begin with the questioning. As you know, police shootings have captured headlines throughout the country over the past 2 years. Here in Pasco, Antonio Zambrano Montes was shot and killed by police officers for throwing rocks at them, an incident that was captured on video. The prosecutor declined to press charges against the officers, citing current state law, which requires proof that officers acted with malice and without good faith. We begin with Mr. Bryant. Do you believe that standard should be changed?
Well, let's first talk about the environment in which we're living. And I think too often right now in the United States, we're living in an environment that is sort of based on fear. And that's not healthy for any of us. For our communities to really work, for us to exist together in a solid community, for us to have a good relationship with law enforcement, we need to have trust, regardless of what the law is. We need to make sure that we have trust within our community, between the members of that community and our law enforcement. And that's beginning to fray. And that's undermining our democracy. We need to ensure that we support those who run towards danger, not away from it, when there is a problem. But at the same time, we need to make sure that those people are representing us and treating everyone fairly and equally. There is right now a task force to examine this. They're looking at all facets of what is a very difficult issue. They're supposed to come out with their findings. It involves law enforcement and advocates. And I look forward to looking at those results and deciding whether or not Washington State needs to change its legislation. At this point, until we have that recommendation, I think it would be premature.
Mr. Inslee.
We have come a long ways in America dealing with our racial divide, but we know we have more work to do to cure racial injustice. And we feel the pain of any family who loses anyone of any race involved in violence. Look, I'm proud. I'm endorsed by every single law enforcement group that's done an endorsement in this race. I'm honored to have their endorsement. I feel very strongly these are men and women who put on the badge every morning and go out into harm's way. They deserve our support. But we do need to do a couple things. We do need to examine our accountability statute, which is very unusual. It's an outlier in the United States. And we have to do this to prevent these shootings in the first place. We need to make sure that officers have training so that they can de-escalate problems, so that they can be culturally competent. And we have one of the best criminal justice training centers in the whole country, and they do this well. But we've got to make sure in 2017, we make sure every officer has that training to try to prevent these tragedies.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, the final piece of the state Supreme Court's McCleary mandate on school funding is to end the over-reliance on local levies. In many cases, these levies are paying for teacher salaries, which is a state obligation. Do you agree with the concept of a levy swap, whereby local property tax levies would be lowered and the state property tax levy would be raised to solve this problem? A swap, in effect. Governor Inslee?
Well, I believe in improving the education of our students. That's why we put $5.5 billion of new money in the smart things we're doing for kids. So now we have to take the last step. It's like climbing Mount Everest. We put $5.5 billion in, 2.2 to McCleary. But we got to get the rest away to the summit. There is a way to have some swap involved in this solution set to reduce local levies and make that up in the state levy. But we should not confuse this with a proposal that the Republicans have put forth, which would end up raising the property taxes for half the citizens in the state of Washington. So under their proposal, on their type of levy swap, it would raise the property taxes for half of the people in this state and yet put no money into their local schools. I don't believe that that's the tenable version. And I'm committed to getting this done in 2017. I believe we can do this. I believe combinations of robust economic growth, maybe closing a couple loopholes, we can replace those local levy dollars. I think that can be done. And I have to tell you, I was shocked when Bill at the Kitsap Journal the other day said, no, we can just kick that can down the road past 2017. And I'll tell you why that was shocking to me is we actually have fashioned a bipartisan commitment. Both Democrats and Republicans, at my request, are now working on a task force to come up with the price tag so we can get this job done. We've got to get this done in 2017. I'm committed to doing it, and I'm confident we can get that job done.
Bill Bryant, where are you on the levy swap concept?
Well, it's what you didn't hear is what I think is important. You heard no plan. Governor Inslee 4 years ago said he would have a plan, but he didn't have one during the campaign. Rob McKenna had a plan. The governor took out TV ads attacking Rob McKenna's plan, even though he had no plan of his own. But he promised one after getting elected in 2013. But in 2013, he had no plan. In 2014, he had no plan. In 2015, he vowed action in 2016, but in 2016, all he did was set up that committee to promise to work on it before 2017. That committee has met 5 times. The governor's made half of one of those meetings. He has no plan. He's not engaged. Delivering a plan through this legislative session in 2017 is one of the primary reasons I am running for governor. And I have already started working with legislators and education reformers around the state on a 4-pronged plan. The first is equity. Right now we have a situation where rich school districts are actually able to provide their kids with programs that rural and disadvantaged neighborhoods are not able to provide. That's not only unconstitutional, it's morally wrong. And under the plan that I'm working with legislators on, we will ensure there's equity, that every kid, regardless of where they grow up, is going to have the same amount of money spent on them. The second thing is we need to fully fund education. Under my plan, we will spend 50% of our general fund revenue budget on K-12 education. The third thing we need to do, though, is innovation. We can't just pour more gas into a broken engine and expect us to get where we want to go. And so I want to reinvent the last 2 years of high school so it's relevant to what kids want to do after they graduate. So we have pre-apprenticeship programs and industry certification programs for kids who don't want to go on to college. And then we have to deal with uniformity. And this, Governor, is what I said we might need to deal with through 2020, because we have some teachers.
Let me follow up with you, because I didn't get a clear answer. And this will be probably the single biggest budget item you both deal with, solving McCleary and the levy swap as a concept that's out there. Bill Bryant, where are you on the concept of lowering local property taxes and raising state property tax to solve this over-reliance, which the Supreme Court is
We have a situation right now where some very rural poor districts are paying $5 per thousand in property taxes, and some wealthier districts are paying $1.20. And actually, those folks in that poor district are still, even though they're charging themselves $5 per thousand, are not able to generate enough money to provide their kids with the same programs the kids in richer districts get for $1.20. And so what I would like to do is look at a hybrid model that's based on the Massachusetts funding system, where you have an equal property tax across all districts. And that raises whatever it raises in that district. And then the state backfills. So money doesn't go to Olympia and then get sent back. It stays in the district. But the state ensures that every kid, regardless of where they grow up, is going to have the same amount of money spent on them.
Well, Governor Inslee, you have said you are amenable to some kind of levy swap. You've said it in your answer. Please clarify how much and what that would look like.
This is a complicated issue, but I will attempt in 60 seconds. We can reduce the local levies in high property tax areas and also reduce the levy in low property tax areas, and thereby reduce the local levy burden on local taxpayers. But we can only do it so much, because if you do it too far, you end up increasing the property taxes in the wealthier areas. And once we start doing that, I don't believe people will be acceptable to raise property taxes and end up not putting any additional dollars. We need to put dollars in so that we can have apprenticeship programs. By the way, Bill talks about a lack of plan. We've had action. Look, we've had action. We're starting an apprenticeship program, first one in the state, this year. We have full-day kindergarten starting this year. We are reducing class sizes this year. This year, kids are getting the tuition cuts, and it's because we have found a way to put $5.5 billion into our paramount duty.
Thank you. Thank you. Move on to our next question. In Yakima, a federal court ruling forced a citywide district voting system that led to the first-time election of 3 Latinas to the city council there. The court ruled the city's at-large voting system was suppressing the representation of Yakima's significant Latino population. Supporters say that the Washington Voters' Right Act would make this easier in other cities without court intervention. Mr. Bryant, what are your views in this bill? Would you support it?
Well, we need to have a system where every vote counts and where everybody believes that their vote counts. Dr. King, Martin Luther King, said that when people feel estranged from their society and separated from it, they don't feel any obligation to that society. And he said when that happens, the content of our democracy is emptied. We need a vibrant democracy, and that means we're going to have to, in some cases, rearrange the lines so that everyone's vote counts. And that's why I support legislation for the city of Pasco to be able to move their lines around so that every population can be equally represented. But we have in Washington State a bigger problem than just redrawing electoral lines. Our fastest growing demographic population are Latinos. Only 30% of Latinos will not graduate from high school. If they don't graduate from high school, they're more likely to be incarcerated or live in poverty or have health problems. And if that's the case, there are going to be more and more divorce from our community. We need to make sure that everybody is an active member of community, and that means we've got to focus on high school graduation rates. And that's why I'm not going to wait till being sworn in. During the transition, I'm going to pull together minority educators and minority leaders, and we're going to put together a 4-year initiative to increase high school graduation rates among our minority communities.
Governor.
I fully support the Washington State Voting Rights Act. I have been diligently attempting to pass it over the objections of the Republican Party. I do believe this is healthy for democracy. I do believe the experience in Yakima has been very demonstrably shown that this can really help communities. We now have 3 young Latinas, 2 of whom represent districts that are not majority Latino or Latino the districts. But in order to facilitate that and make it easier for local communities to embrace that far-sighted effort, to give people fundamentally the ability to have their neighborhood decide who's going to represent them, we need the Voting Rights Act to make sure that happens. And yes, we do need people, and young Latino and Latinas, to get early child education. I have put as much money or more in early child education. We have 7,000 new kids. I was delighted to go to Mountain View Elementary School to see Spanish-speaking kids learning to speak English because of the early education that I helped finance. I love the fact that Latino and Latinas are going to get full-day kindergarten now so they don't fall behind. I love the fact that we're going to have smaller class sizes now so that in the early grades, these kids, the courage of these kids who come in here not speaking English is pretty amazing to me. And when you see their eyes light up when they get a concept because they've got a good teacher in a smaller classroom, good things can happen.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Joining us tonight to assist in the questioning are 4 local journalists. We begin with Glenn Cassie from KNDU-TV here in the Tri-Cities.
Good evening, Governor. Diana from Tacoma submitted this question online. Last month, 5 people were killed in a mass shooting in Burlington at the Cascade Mall. If the suspected shooter is found guilty and sentenced to death, would you lift your moratorium and allow that sentence to proceed?
Well, this and every other tragedy touches all of our hearts. The pain that these families feel is beyond imagination. I know that because I've spoken to them. In my deliberations about the death penalty, I have met with victims of these crimes, some of whom agree with my position and some of them who disagree strongly with my position. And the position I take is one that follows the fundamental precept that we should have equal justice under law. So I did a lot of research about the death penalty in our state, and I found some disturbing things. The fact is that the death penalty is not anywhere close to used in an equitable measure. One person gets life, the other person gets death. It depends on which side of the county line you are. There are racial aspects of this that enter into this. And I don't believe, no matter what you believe on the philosophical aspect, whether a New Testament or an Old Testament person, and both are sincere, we got to have a system that is equal. And what I found is that our death penalty machine, if you will, is grossly inequitable. There's essentially no death penalty in about 28 of our counties today because it costs too much. It's a lot cheaper, these counties have found, to put someone in jail for the rest of their life with no possibility of probation or parole, and then to go through 20 years of appeals paying lawyers. So what I have found is we need an equitable system, and I will maintain my position is that we will have a moratorium on the death penalty while I'm governor of the state of Washington.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Mr. Bryant, are you for the death penalty, and is it appropriate in this case?
Well, I'm very confused about what the governor did. I mean, it seems as if he just sort of woke up one morning and without talking to any of the victims or any prosecutors around the state, decided he was going to impose a moratorium on the death penalty. And it's not really clear what would happen if a death warrant came up. I don't know, Governor, are you suggesting you would pardon the person or you would set aside the conviction? I'm unclear on what you would actually do. But let me tell you, my position, what I will do as governor. I am very uncomfortable with the state being able to take life. But I do not think that a governor gets to pick and choose which laws to enforce and which to ignore. So as long as it is the law in Washington state, I will enforce it.
We go now to Lori Williams from the Tri-City Herald.
Thank you. Speaking of the court system, the state of Washington has currently 2 lawsuits filed against the Department of Energy related to the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. One is about missing deadlines and emptying tanks and treating waste. The other is about seeking worker protection from chemical vapors. Mr. Bryant, is the litigation the best way to achieve Hanford cleanup, and do you support both lawsuits?
Well, thank you. I appreciate you asking that because actually I was spending part of today talking to different people about that. And during this campaign, I've learned an awful lot about Hanford. I have more to learn, but I've spent 2-3 days here meeting with people from all sides of the issue. I've talked to employees, I've talked to previous employees, I've talked to contractors, I've talked to members of the Federal Department of Energy. And I'm trying to understand from all perspectives what's going on and why we're falling so far behind. And all of these people have different perspectives on what we need to be doing. But there are 3 elements that kind of ring true through all of them. The first is that Governor Inslee really isn't engaged, or certainly not as engaged as Governor Gregoire was, and that they say we really need gubernatorial leadership. The second thing that they're saying is that he's focused so much on the tanks that he's ignoring the fact that we have a much bigger and more immediate threat with some of the properties only 120 yards from the river. And then finally, third, and this goes to your point, they're saying that because he's largely relegated this issue to the Attorney General, we're mired in litigation because that's what the Attorney General does. And what they're telling me is that because we have so much litigation going on right now, parties really can't talk to each other about how we move forward. And we're so focused on getting a lawsuit and a win in court and being able to issue a press release saying we won that we're really not talking to people about how we can move up our time frame and clean up this mess. And as governor, I want to provide that leadership. We need leadership, not lawsuits.
Governor, the taxpayers are paying both to prosecute and to defend these suits. So what do you say to people who believe that their money would be better spent cleaning up Hanford rather than in the court system?
I totally agree. What would be better is if the federal government fulfills its responsibility to Washington citizens. And I don't need a lot of education on this in a sense because I've been working on this off and on for about 2 decades, formerly representing Hanford. When I was in Congress, I was a member of the Hanford caucus, worked with Doc Hastings to make sure that we were on top of these issues, went to countless briefings. As far as not talking to another one, I met with Secretary Ernie Moniz, who I consider a friend, about 5 weeks in Seattle to talk about these and other issues. We are very engaged in talking to our federal partners, but frankly, the federal government has let down the people of Tri-Cities. Look, the people of Tri-Cities are the most skilled workers in the world. And they've done some good work. They've removed about 500 square miles of radioactive material, and they've consolidated it up on the plateau. They have a great plan, but we've got to give them more safety. They should not be exposed to fumes. They should not be exposed to radioactive material. We had several workers get some radioactive material just the other day. And we do have to provide some mechanism to hold Uncle Sam's feet to the fire. Look, it's a battle for appropriations in the U.S. Congress. And that battle has to be won if we're going to make sure that we finance the projects at Hanford. And there's a tendency to let things just kind of get kicked down the road. So sometimes litigation is necessary. And I think we're making the right decision, working with our federal partners, but being insistent that Uncle Sam does their part for the people of the state of Washington and the people of the Tri-Cities.
We'd like now to go to our first Microsoft Pulse question. We asked all of you which two of these four topics you want most addressed during this section. Here are the results. Healthcare, 23%, homelessness, 45%, small business, 18%, and women's issues, 13%. So homelessness tops the concerns. And so I go to this question from an audience member here in Pasco. Governor Inslee, cities across Washington are experiencing a surge in homelessness. Now that it has reached a crisis level, do you believe it's time for the state to appoint a homeless czar to take charge of this issue and organize and coordinate a state response?
Well, we have increased our coordination. One of the first things I did was to direct our Department of Commerce to focus priorities on youth homelessness. And we now, in part because of my wife Trudy's leadership, we've passed a youth homelessness bill that will coordinate activities across multiple agencies to deal with youth homelessness. But I think beyond that, it's more important to put meat on the bone to do things that will help people who are homeless. These folks they're citizens, they're neighbors, they're family members. If they can get a little help, they can get back on their feet. So here's what we've been doing. Number one, we've been increasing low-income housing stock. We've built about 2,300 low-income housing stock since I've been governor. We have saved about 4,000 others that were on the verge to go into high rent. Second, we have led the country in a thing called rapid rehousing. Now, this is a program that basically, instead of getting people into transitional housing, where frequently they don't improve, we get them into permanent housing much more rapidly. The federal government is following this. King County is now starting to follow our lead. I think that this is going to be very helpful. Third, we have focused on veterans housing. When I came in, there were 1,400 veterans, and I found that totally unexcusable who are homeless in the state of Washington. So we went to work and we have housed those 1,400 veterans. But guess what? There's more veterans that have come in and become homeless. And why have they become homeless? We know there's addiction problems, and we're going to integrate our mental and physical health systems so we can have better addiction treatment. But here's the other thing. Rent is going up and wages are not. And every time rent goes up $100, homelessness goes up 15%. One of the things we can do about this is increase the minimum wage. Look, people, 30% of the homeless people in this state are working full time. They don't have an addictive problem. They don't have a mental health problem. What they have is a wage problem. So I'm supporting a minimum wage increase. It's on the ballot this year, and I'm looking forward to help as many ways as I can.
Bill Bryant, is it time for a homelessness czar in Washington?
No, we don't need a homelessness czar. We need a governor. This is a very important issue.
You want to tell audience? We ask you not to applaud or make any announcements on your own, so please.
This is a personal issue for me. Long before I ever ran for office, I was a volunteer night manager at a homeless shelter in Seattle. And I understand the multifaceted reasons why people are homeless. And I'll tell you what, we do not have a coordinated approach regardless of what Governor Inslee says. There is no coordination between the cities and the states, and that's got to happen. We are spending twice as much on homelessness now than we were a few years ago before Jay Inslee, and yet homelessness has exploded. If someone in my company came to me and said, you know, we have a problem and I'm spending twice as much as we used to trying to solve this problem and the problem's only gotten bigger, I'd say you're not doing your job. And you're not doing your job. Here, if I'm governor, I'll tell you, we're going to do 6 things. The first, we will have a zero tolerance for camping on state lands. Second, we will give local law enforcement the authority they need to go in and deal with the criminal element in some of these camps, and we'll also allow them to clean them up when necessary. Third, the state needs to look at how the cities are spending the state money on homelessness. In Seattle, we're spending between $10,000 and $14,000 per homeless person. That's more than we spend for the care of some foster kids. We need to make sure that this money is being spent well. We can spend it well by investing in more permanent housing and job counseling. And that's going to require looking at some building codes so we can build more tiny houses for people who are looking to get back on their feet. We also need to provide more mental health care. Under Governor Inslee, our mental health system is ranked 50th. Let that sink in. And then we need to coordinate the policies between the Department of Social and Health Services and the Department of Commerce. They're spread out under Governor Inslee, and under Governor Bryant, they will be consolidated.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next issue, and that is health care. Open enrollment for individual insurance plans starts on November 1st. Costs continue to go up. Two insurers, United Health and MOTA, have withdrawn from the marketplace. Next year, the average premium increase will be 13%. Is the health insurance market in Washington working? And what will you do to slow the premium increases? We'll start with you, Bill Bryant.
Well, this is a huge issue for whoever walks into the governor's office in January of 2017. If we don't get a handle on our health care costs, and particularly our Medicaid costs, in 10 years, it's going to consume a disproportionate amount of our budget. So we need to make sure that our health care system works. And right now, it's not. It's meeting the needs of some, but a lot of people are seeing their premiums going way up and their coverage going way down. And that is not a pathway forward. One of the other things that I'm hearing from patients and doctors alike is that if you want to have a marketplace that works well, you've got to be able to provide them with real-time information so that patients can make informed decisions and so doctors can communicate to patients about what their choices are. And we don't have that. We need to have that. We also need to combine primary and mental health. Right now, I'm being told that in a lot of cases, our costs are going up because if somebody comes in for a primary health issue, let's say a sore throat, but the doctor realizes there's a mental health issue there as well, they'll give them a prescription for the sore throat and then tell them to come back in 30 or 40 days for the mental health evaluation, which probably never happens. And it's that mental health issue that we've got to deal with. If we want to keep costs under control, we need to combine primary and mental health. And there's some good models of where that is happening right now in Southwest Washington. There are opportunities for us to make savings, but it's going to take an engaged governor, an activist governor, and that's the kind of governor I want to be.
Governor Inslee.
We are doing in the state of Washington today with the current governor every single thing that Bill talked about, all of which were good ideas. And guess what? We're already doing them. We are leading the United States in maintaining a low medical inflation rate. We like it to be zero. We like it to be negative 5%. But we are leading, and here's the best evidence of this. Last week, the federal government gave my administration, because of my leadership and my team's leadership, a waiver to creatively use $1.5 billion. And here's what we're going to do with this. One, we are integrating mental and physical health. This is a no-brainer. We are leading the country in the integration of mental and physical health. So you don't have to go to different places for treatment between your mental and physical health difficulty. Number two, we are inventing whole new ways of purchasing health care so that we buy value rather than volume. The old way of buying health care was to buy a procedure, and you'd pay the physician per procedure. We want to pay the physician in the hospital for health, and we are leading the country in buying value rather than volume. We are increasing the availability of help for this opioid epidemic that we are experiencing. Last week, I announced our initiative to attack the opioid epidemic. It has to do with making sure that our physicians don't overprescribe anyone, particularly our youth. It's providing telemedicine services to primary care physicians so that and if they're in Ephrata, you can call somebody at UW and get the latest information. These things are working today. We are leading the country. I'm proud of our work, and we want to continue it.
Tolling. It has become very common in Washington, as you both know, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, the 520 Bridge, the Viaduct Tunnel will be tolled. We, of course, have hot lanes on 405, I-67. Governor Inslee, do you support expanded use of tolls and hot lanes to help generate the revenue and money needed to replace and repair other corridors across the state, which will soon need major upgrades? Is that an appropriate user fee?
We have not made that part of our plan going forward. Here's what we did this year. When I started as governor, I knew how troublesome traffic congestion is. It's driving people to distraction in many places across the state of Washington. So I decided to focus intensely to build a big infrastructure improvement plan that can reduce congestion, to build more buses, light rail, single vehicles, overpasses, connections of 405 to 167. We had a lot of opposition to that for a couple years because the folks in the Senate didn't want to pass a bill. But eventually I brought the parties together and we passed a $16 billion transportation package. This is the largest infrastructure development project in the history of the state of Washington. And it's going to help everybody from Red Mountain interchange to Highway 12 here in this part of the country to finish the North-South Freeway in Spokane. It's going to finish 167, the highway to nowhere in Pierce County. We did the first groundbreaking to improve the congestion on 405 just a couple weeks ago. So we have in the pipeline, and this was financed not by tolls, but by an increase in the gas tax. And we'd like to do that for nothing, but if you're going to build a big infrastructure program, obviously you have to have revenues. We thought that was a fair and best way to do it. Now, we now are involved in a program to have a 2-year program on tolling on 405 that Bill helped design. And we are improving that 405 corridor by adding a lane so that we can reduce congestion.
Bill Bryant, where are you at on tolling?
Well, I have no idea what the governor is talking about, me helping design the toll lanes on 405, and I want to take one of those 405 toll lanes and convert it to a general purpose lane. Let me be very clear. You didn't get a very clear answer from Governor Inslee. You also heard him taking credit for passing the transportation package. I find that amazing. In the last months before Governor Gregoire left office, she pulled about 20 of us together to put together a transportation package for whether it was Mr. McKenna or Mr. Inslee walking into that office. And at the end of about a 16-month period, 12 to 16-month period, we put together a plan for the next governor. It was ready to go for the next legislative session. And Governor Inslee came into town and made transportation a partisan issue for the first time ever and blew it up. And it took many of us 3 years to put it back together again. We need to reduce traffic congestion. It will be the top priority for my Washington State Department of Transportation, and we don't need to have more mega projects. The engineers of the Department of Transportation, former and current, are saying, you know what you need to do, Bill? You need to have some micro solutions. We know there's an on-ramp or an off-ramp that was never really meant to handle the amount of traffic it's handling now, and so we need to reconfigure it. They're saying we know there are difficult parts of road where we need to add a lane. And I want to reiterate, we need to remove one of the toll HOT lanes from 405. But we also need to invest in transit that works and that people use because it works. And we need to be able to deliver this transit within the next 6 to 8 years. And that's why in my administration, I'm going to add capacity so that we can bring in bus rapid transit to communities all across the Puget Sound area.
All right, we go now to Ed Dawson from News Radio 610 KONA.
Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome to the Tri-Cities. This next question is for both, and it comes from an audience member who is concerned about water quality in the Yakima Basin, arguing that the State Department of Ecology is disregarding the recommendations of its own scientists to protect lower Yakima Valley well water from nitrate pollution resulting from big ag. Start with Mr. Bryant. How would you respond to that concern?
Well, some of you know I lived in Yakima in the mid-1980s and the early 90s, and my company still does business between Omak and Walla Walla, and so I'm very involved with a number of folks who are struggling with exactly the issues that you're bringing out right now. And what they're telling me is, Bill, we're not making decisions based on sound science. They want to protect the water quality, but they're saying, actually, these are regulations that were really written more for over on the coast, and what we need are regulations that are written for here in the Yakima Valley. They're not against the regulations. They just want to make sure that before they make huge investments, that it's actually going to yield a result at the end of the day. And they're concerned that they're going to be asked to make huge investments and the water quality won't be improved at all. None of us want that. That's actually why I've said on day one, I'm going to impose a moratorium on all new regulations until the departments can justify the ones that we've already got. I think it's going to take us about 6 months. But by June of 2017, we're going to look at every regulation. We're going to see whether it's meeting its objective. We're going to look and see how you know it's meeting its objective. How do you measure success? If it's successful, what will look differently in 4 to 7 years? And what's the legislative authority that gives you the ability to implement that regulation? Let's go through and make sure that what we're asking people to do in Yakima and all across Washington State is based on sound science and is actually moving us towards a goal that we all want to achieve. If we do that, and we can do that, we'll have a regulatory system that people have confidence in and want to invest in.
Thank you. Governor Inslee?
The people of Yakima deserve to have a well where you can give the well water to your 3-month-old and not worry about them getting nitrate poisoning. Now, that's pretty simple. And my administration is adopting a rule that will reduce the amount of nitrates that get into people's wells to preserve human health and children's health. And I got to tell you, I just take issue with my opponent who doesn't want to move forward on what clearly scientifically is necessary for health. And it is an approach that is not just about wells. Look, we need rules against oil trains blowing up. We saw the oil train blow up down in Mosier, Oregon. We need a rule that will help the railroads be safer. You know, inspect their rails on a more frequent basis. Do some other things to help first responders. My opponent wants to stop that rulemaking process. I just don't understand that. I don't understand when we now have in the pipeline the ability, this is a little off subject, comes back to this last issue, but I'll use my time. Look, we're going to build a Red Mountain interchange here, big infrastructure project, costs, I don't know, $40 million. We're going to fix Highway 12, but Bill says we don't need to do that. He's just going to do it with some kind of magic in the DOT office. I just have to disagree with him. We got to build this state. Look, we got 50 or 60,000 people moving here because we have the #1 economy in the United States. It's one of the reasons we have a homelessness problem. They're driving up rent. So we need to build a transportation infrastructure project that can accommodate all these new people so we don't die in congestion. And we need to have rules that will protect our children's drinking water in the Yakima Valley.
All right, let's move on. Republican Secretary of State Kim Wyman is calling for a law that would require residents to prove U.S. citizenship or legal residency to get state driver's licenses. And also it would ensure that non-citizens don't vote. Washington is the only state in the country that does not require legal documentation to get a driver's license or a state identification. Immigrant rights groups argue that there is no proof of non-citizens voting, and others say this could hurt the state's agricultural industry in need of workers to harvest crops. Governor Inslee, where do you stand?
Well, I'm not sure what the Secretary is proposing. It's quite unclear to me. If she is proposing that we need to bring our driver's license rules into compliance with the Federal Real ID Act, I agree with that, and I have proposed legislation to do that. It really is a very simple piece of legislation. The legislators have not seen fit to pass that, and I believe that we can and should pass that. If she's talking about requiring people who started voting in 1948, fought in the Korean War, but now we don't let them vote unless they trundle down to the courthouse and show them their birth certificate, then no, I just don't believe that's necessary, because I think there's such minimal suggestion that there has been this particular problem. Look, I think we need more people voting. And so if that is what she is suggesting, I don't know if it is. She's been pretty clear. I'm trying to use non-judgmental language, but I can't figure out what she's proposing. But yes, we do need to bring our driver's license system into compliance with the federal law. And the reason is that at some point the federal government will no longer allow us to use our driver's license to get on an airplane, and that will be a substantial inconvenience. So I have talked with the administration. I most recently talked to the Assistant Secretary about 3 weeks about this subject in hopes that the federal government can allow us to pass a law that will fix this, and I will get that done.
Mr. Bryant.
Well, I want to go back and address some of the issues that Governor Inslee brought up, because we need to clarify the record here. He said that I was opposed to any regulations of oil trains, which is just flat out not true, and he knows it because it's come up before, and saying it over and over again, Governor, doesn't make it true. I was talking to railroad workers today, and they're actually quite dissatisfied with the fact that you haven't done anything that they have asked you to do on this issue.
I want to remind you, Bill Bryant, that the rules forbid you from talking directly to your
So I'll talk to you. They were telling me that the governor has done nothing on this issue. Let me tell you what I will do as your governor. As your governor, I'm going to move forward with laws and regulations that will ensure that we have adequate crew on the back of the trains, that we restrict the train length if they're carrying oil, and that we have regular inspections of our cars and our tracks. Let's be clear. Also, the whole idea that I'm not going to finish 509 or 167 when I have dedicated the last 10 years to getting those built is just absurd. I'm not relying on magic. I was relying on a transportation package that you blew up and that we passed 3 years later in spite of him.
Direct communication.
In spite of him. So, When it comes to transportation, when it comes to oil train safety, I'm going to be defending the interests of the people of Washington State. In terms of ensuring that we have a voter ID that ensures that we have citizens voting, yes, we have to do it. We are one of 50 states that don't, and if we do not take action, you're going to have a passport to get on an airplane, and I do not want to have people have to go buy a passport in order to go visit their grandparents in California.
We now welcome Tom Yazwinski from KEPR-TV here in Pasco.
Gentlemen, as a father of two little girls, education very important to me, very important to many people in this community and this state. But a new report shows that in the last 5 years, the demand for new teachers in Washington schools has increased by 250%, partly due to the fact that experienced teachers are leaving. So, Mr. Bryant, what is your plan to recruit and retain highly qualified teachers?
Well, I love this question because for me, teachers are family. My dad was a teacher. My sister was a teacher and is now a principal. And my sister-in-law and my brother-in-law are all teachers. So this isn't just something that we, study about. This is something that comes up at family dinners all the time. And we've got to ensure that we are keeping young, innovative teachers in the system. And right now, too many of them are leaving after 3 or 4 years. And why? Part of it's compensation. And this is where I really, as your governor, want to dedicate increased funding for teachers to go to the new teachers and the young teachers. Governor Inslee put through a proposal that would actually have given the most increases to teachers that make over $70,000 a year. That's not going to solve the problem. And it's actually going to make funding McClary even more difficult. So let's put the funding into new teachers and encourage them to stay in the profession. Let's also make sure that we're recruiting teachers of color for communities of color so they can identify with the children. And let's figure out how we can compensate excellent teachers. As your governor, I want to build a state where every teacher wants to teach in Washington State because they're fairly compensated and they're supported. And that's what we've got to strive for. It's what I will strive for in 4 years.
Governor Inslee, same question to you. What will you do to keep teachers in the classroom?
Well, let me tell you what we've done, because this is an extremely important issue. We lose about 50% of our new teachers for a combination of their lack of support in the classroom, excess class sizes, and inadequate compensation. And I, as your governor, have moved and have made substantial progress on all three of those things. It's one of the reasons why I'm proud to be endorsed by the 55,000 educators. Actually, it's about 70,000 educators in the state of Washington, because they know this is a very high priority to me. My dad was a biology teacher at South and Garfield High School. My brother's a teacher. My brother and sister-in-law is a teacher. I know what this means. So here's what we've done. Number one, we and I fought and won and have the endorsement of the educators about this to get them a small increase in compensation, but it is not enough. We're going to need to do more to be able to attract and retain quality people, because I tell you what, they teach for 2 or 3 years, then they go to work for Amazon. These are very high quality people. Second, I have provided, and I'm very pleased by this, because this was one of the things that I really fought for, a mentorship program. We throw these young teachers into challenging conditions without mentors. My dad always told me he learned to teach from a guy named Swede Lindquist, who was an old football coach, took my dad aside, really taught him how to teach. So now our teachers have a mentorship. When we have a new teacher in Tri-Cities, Spokane, I saw this the other day, they get a mentor that stands beside them and work with them. Third, we're reducing class sizes. Look, it's not fair to a teacher to have to go in and see those 25, 28 charming faces, but there's just too many of them. So we are reducing class sizes. So those are the three most important things we've done.
Thank you, Governor.
We've done every single one of them, and we're going to keep it up when I'm governor.
Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, you both have opposed a state income tax. However, going forward, would you support closing any of Washington's many tax breaks as a way to raise revenue to help meet the state's obligation to schools and other programs? If so, what specific breaks would you close? And if not, why? Governor Inslee?
Yes, I do and have supported closing some of the corporate tax breaks that are no longer economically justifiable, are not creating jobs, but are making it impossible to educate our children. And we have closed some of them. Because we have been able to close some of them, we have been able to give every student a tuition break in our public schools. We've been able to increase compensation for teachers. And now we want to move forward to extend some of the things we're doing in the four-year colleges to Columbia Basin Community College. Look, we have an opportunity grant program here. It's the first of its kind in the world or in the nation, where we give kids, mostly minority kids and kids in poverty, if you go into a STEM program, we get a free education. It increases our graduation rate from 55% to 95%. It's magic. I want to extend that to this community college and every community and technical college across the state of Washington. And that may include or require using the revenues that are coming in because we have such robust economic growth and closing some of these loopholes. Now, I know Bill has a different view. I know he served for years as a registered federal lobbyist. I know that he is close to the oil and gas industry. But look, I believe the loophole that gives the oil and gas industry $65 million that they do not need, it wasn't even meant for that industry. It was meant for the forest products industry. That ought to be closed. And there are others as well, but I'm out of time.
Bill Bryant, what loopholes would you close specifically, if any?
Well, I'm in favor of putting all loopholes on the table, despite what the governor says, and once again, he knows that, but continuing to say it over and over again, he'll hope people think it's true, but it's not. I've said on day one, I'm going to identify strategic objectives for every department, and then we're looking at every program, every agency, and every tax incentive, every loophole. And if they're not moving us towards that strategic objective, we fix them or we eliminate them. Everything is on the table in a Bryant administration. Look, he says he doesn't support an income tax. Fine. This is a guy who said he would veto any tax increase 4 years ago, and within weeks of getting into office, proposed over $1 billion in new taxes. A tax on carbon, a tax on bottled water, a tax on beer, a tax on certain types of income. He says he doesn't support an income tax, but I've asked him, will you veto a tax? Will you veto a tax on income if it lands on your desk? And he won't say no. A few weeks ago in Vancouver, he said, you know, he would consider a tax on certain kinds of income. We need to close loopholes, but ladies and gentlemen, closing loopholes is not going to provide us with the $1 billion we need to fund McCleary. We're going to have a program that will equitably fund education across our state. And it's going to be much more complicated than the governor thinks. That's why my four-pronged plan, where we deal with equity, where we increase the funding to 50% of the general fund, where we look at innovation, and where we deal with uniformity between school districts, that's how we're going to get it done. It's hard work. It's hard to talk about in a minute and 60 seconds or a minute and 30 seconds. But it's the kind of work that I am dedicating myself to as your governor.
All right. We've reached the point now where we are at the end of our questions. So it's time now for each of you to provide your closing statements. And we begin with Bill Bryant.
Well, I really appreciate this opportunity to come and have this debate. I appreciate you, Governor, being a part of it. I know you really don't like them that much, but they're important to our democracy. And it gives people a choice. And this year, you really do have a choice between two different types of people. I don't know who thinks if we re-elect Governor Inslee, what's going to change. Because if you listen to the debate tonight, think about what you didn't hear. You had a lot of talk about what he's done and how much money we've spent, but he never said this is where we're going to go with education. I gave you a 4-point plan. You didn't get one from him. When we talked about what we need to be doing on transportation, he talked about what he had sort of done and took credit for a lot of other people's work. But he didn't really talk about how we're going to get rid of traffic congestion. We didn't talk about how we're going to recover salmon runs. We didn't talk really about what we want to do with the homeless. And I gave you a 6-point plan. What do you think really is going to be different if we re-elect Governor Inslee? I don't think anything. I think we're going to continue to have gridlock in Olympia and on our highways. Let me tell you what would be different if you elect me. I want to be an activist governor. I want to make sure that we have an education system that meets the needs of every kid. I want to ensure that we work with employers to provide jobs for communities in Washington state that are still suffering from 8 to 9% unemployment. I'm going to be dedicated to ensuring that we reduce traffic jams so people can get to work on time and can get home to see their kids. And I want us all to dedicate ourselves to rebuilding our mental health system. These are the kinds of things that we can do. That is not a partisan or an ideological agenda. It's just about all of us, Republicans and Democrats and independents coming together so people can get a good job here and afford a house here and raise a family and retire in this natural beauty we all love and want to protect. That's what I want to do as your governor. I'm asking for your vote.
Thank you very much.
Join me.
Thank you. Okay. Governor Inslee.
Thank you to all, to my opponent. I love debates. I don't know where Bill got the idea. I love debates, but I love taking the oath of office even more. So I would be honored if you could help me in that regard, and I want to tell you why that is. The last 4 years, I've got up every single morning, and I have tried to figure out what I could do to help Washingtonians realize their dreams. And they're realizing a lot of their dreams because of the work that I've done in a bipartisan fashion. Most all of our success in the last 4 years has been on a bipartisan fashion because we have divided government in the legislature. And I think it's a bipartisan joy and certainly a personal joy of mine when I can go to an elementary school and see a young child who might have a speech difficulty, who if she didn't get help with her speech difficulty might end up never reaching her full potential. And now she's going to do that by the thousands because of the success we're having in early childhood education. It's a joy to go to a ribbon cutting like I did the other day when we're improving 405, which is going to connect to 167, and it's going to reduce congestion on one of the most congested corridors in the state, Interstate 405. That's a joy to go there because what it means is we are an optimistic state. And when you think about it, a bridge fundamentally is a monument to optimism. It means that you're going to do better, your community is going to grow, you're going to create more jobs, you're going to have more scholarships, you're going to have better early education, and yes, you're going to have less oil trains that blow up. And I think all of those things are good things. So I would be very appreciative of your vote. Good luck. Let's remain a confident and optimistic evergreen state. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and we also would very much like to thank our audience here at the Columbia Basin College.